I discovered the construction equipment on my property on a Tuesday morning in March, parked right at the edge of what I call my back 40, the 40 acres of wooded land behind my house in rural Jefferson County, Missouri. My name is Quentin Jameson, and I had purchased this 100-acre property 3 years ago specifically because I wanted privacy and space. The main house sat on a cleared 5 acres at the front, with another 55 acres of fields and pasture in the middle, and then the back 40 of dense oak and hickory forest that bordered the new Meadowbrook Heights subdivision. I had made it crystal clear when that development went up 2 years ago that my property line was sacrosanct. I even paid for a survey and had iron stakes driven deep into the ground every 50 feet along that border. But there they were. A backhoe, an excavator, and a dump truck, all bearing the logo of Morrison Construction Company out of St. Louis. I stood there in my work boots and jacket, coffee mug still in hand, just staring at the yellow machines sitting about 30 feet inside my property line. I am not a confrontational man by nature. I spent 20 years as an industrial engineer before retiring early, and I prefer solving problems with logic and planning rather than emotion. So, instead of immediately calling the police or storming over to the construction site, I walked the perimeter. That is when I saw the survey stakes. Bright orange flags on metal stakes, forming a rectangle roughly 200 feet by 300 feet, all clearly on my side of the property line. I pulled out my phone and took approximately 60 photographs from every conceivable angle. I documented the position of the equipment, the survey stakes, and most importantly, the iron property markers I had installed. The GPS coordinates on my phone confirmed what I already knew. This construction zone was entirely on my land. When I got back to my house, I pulled up the plat map I had saved on my computer and cross-referenced it with the photos. No question about it. Someone was planning to build something substantial on my property, and they had gone far enough to bring in heavy equipment and do survey work. I decided to wait and see what happened next. The following morning, Wednesday, a crew of 6 men showed up at 7 in the morning. I watched through binoculars from my back porch as they began clearing trees. The chainsaws echoed across my property, and I felt each falling oak like a physical blow. Those were mature trees, some of them probably 80 or 100 years old. But I did not intervene. I took more photos and videos, making sure to capture timestamps and GPS data. By Friday, they had cleared the entire rectangle and were beginning to excavate. I drove into town to the county recorder's office and pulled every permit that had been filed in the past 6 months for the Meadowbrook Heights area. That is where I found it. The Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, represented by their president, a woman named Karen Novick, had filed for a permit to construct community storage units on what they listed as HOA Common Area 7. The address they provided was ambiguous, using a description that could have referred to actual HOA common land, or, if someone was being deliberately deceptive, could be interpreted to include the section of my back 40. I sat in my truck in the county parking lot and read through the permit application 3 times. The legal description of the land was vague enough that it might have slipped past a clerk who was not intimately familiar with every property boundary in the area. But I knew the truth. They were building on my land, and someone at that HOA either knew it and did not care, or had been monumentally careless with their survey work. This is when most people would have marched over there and shut everything down. But I am a patient man, and something about the situation intrigued me. If the HOA had made this mistake, if they were truly building an entire facility on my property without proper permission, then every dollar they spent was money they would lose. Every storage unit they built would belong to me. I decided to let them continue. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched the construction progress with fascination. They poured concrete foundations for what turned out to be 20 individual storage units, each about 10 feet by 20 feet. The structures were well built, I had to admit. Metal siding, proper ventilation, security locks, the works. They even paved an access road from the subdivision to the storage area, which meant they had created a nice gravel road through my woods without my permission. I documented everything. Every day, I spent at least an hour taking photos and videos. I kept a detailed log of the workers, the equipment, the materials delivered. I noted the Morrison construction trucks coming and going. I saved every receipt that blew off the site and landed on my property. I was building a case and I was meticulous about it. The construction crew never once questioned whose land they were on. Why would they? They had been hired by the HOA, given a survey map and told to build. They were just doing their jobs. I actually felt a bit sorry for them, knowing they would eventually be caught up in the legal mess that was coming. By mid-April, the storage units were substantially complete. They started bringing in finishing touches like gutters, lighting fixtures, and security cameras. The HOA was sparing no expense. I estimated they had already sunk at least $200,000 into this project. That is when Karen Novick herself showed up. I was on my back porch, drinking my morning coffee, when I saw a white Mercedes SUV pull up to the storage units. A woman in her late 40s stepped out, dressed in expensive athleisure wear with perfectly styled blonde hair. She was on her phone, gesturing animatedly as she walked around the units, clearly pleased with the construction. I grabbed my camera with the long lens and captured several clear photos of her inspecting the property. She spent about 20 minutes there, making notes on an iPad and taking her own photos. Then she got back in her Mercedes and drove away. I looked her up on the Meadowbrook Heights HOA website that evening. Karen Novick, president. Her profile photo showed the same blonde woman, smiling professionally. The website indicated she had been HOA president for 4 years and took great pride in maintaining and improving community standards and amenities. Well, she had certainly improved my property. By the end of April, the storage units were completely finished. The HOA held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I watched from a distance as about 30 residents from Meadowbrook Heights gathered at my storage units, drinking champagne and eating catered finger foods. Karen gave a speech about community improvement and property values. Someone from the local newspaper took photos. I saved a copy of the article when it ran in the Jefferson County Gazette the following week. Meadowbrook Heights HOA adds premium storage facility, read the headline. The article quoted Karen extensively about how this new amenity would benefit homeowners and help maintain the high standards of their community. There was no mention that the facility was built on private property without permission. The HOA began renting out the units in early May. I watched as residents started moving items in: lawn equipment, holiday decorations, old furniture, boxes of who knows what. The units filled up quickly. By the 3rd week of May, 18 of the 20 units were occupied. The HOA was charging $75 per month per unit, according to the fee schedule posted on their website. I did the math. At full capacity, they would be collecting $18,000 per year in rental income. Of course, they would need to cover maintenance, insurance, and property taxes. Except they would not be paying property taxes because they did not own the land. I owned the land. And I owned everything on it. June arrived and all 20 units were now rented. I gave it 2 more weeks, just to make sure everyone had their units completely full, and the HOA had collected at least one full month of rent from everyone. Then I scheduled an appointment with Benjamin Fletcher, the best property attorney in Jefferson County. His office was in downtown Hillsborough, in a renovated brick building that had once been a bank. Benjamin was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from 40 years of practicing law. I had done my research. He had handled several major property disputes and had never lost a case. I laid out everything on his conference table: the property survey, the plat maps, the photos and videos showing the construction in progress, the timestamps and GPS data, the permit applications with their vague legal descriptions, the newspaper article, screenshots from the HOA website showing the rental fees, and my detailed log of every single day of construction. Benjamin put on his reading glasses and went through everything methodically. It took him nearly 2 hours. When he finally looked up at me, he had the slightest smile on his face. "Mr. Jameson, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I have ever seen," he said. "You are absolutely certain you want to proceed this way? You could have stopped this construction at any point." "I am certain," I replied. "They trespassed on my property, destroyed my trees, and built a commercial facility without my permission. I want them to feel the full weight of their mistake." "Then we will proceed," Benjamin said. "First, we will have an independent survey company verify the property lines. I will arrange that for next week. Once we have that verification, we will send a formal trespassing notice to the HOA and demand they cease operations immediately. Then we will file a lawsuit for damages, including the value of the trees they destroyed, compensation for the unauthorized use of your land, and a court order determining ownership of the structures." "What about the people who are renting the units?" I asked. "They are innocent parties," Benjamin said. "The HOA will have to deal with them, but legally, those units are on your property, which means you control access. Once we serve notice, the HOA will have to inform their renters that the facility is closing." "How long will this take?" "The initial notice and cease operations order. We can have that done within 2 weeks. The full lawsuit, that could take 6 months to a year, but this case is so clear-cut that I expect the HOA will want to settle rather than go to trial." I left Benjamin's office feeling satisfied. After months of patience, the wheels were finally in motion. The independent survey company came out on June 15th. I met them at the property line and showed them my original survey markers. They spent an entire day doing a complete verification survey, using GPS equipment and traditional surveying tools. Their report, which Benjamin received 3 days later, confirmed exactly what I already knew. The storage facility was built entirely on my property, with the nearest structure approximately 28 feet inside my property line. On June 22nd, Benjamin sent a formal legal notice to the Meadowbrook Heights HOA via certified mail. The letter was addressed to Karen Novick as president and to the HOA's registered agent. It informed them that they had constructed an unauthorized commercial facility on private property, demanded they cease all operations immediately, and warned that failure to comply would result in additional legal action. I got a call from Benjamin 2 days later. "Karen Novick just phoned my office," he said. "She is claiming the storage units are on HOA common land and that you are harassing them. Did you explain that we have a verified survey?" I did. She insisted their survey was correct and accused us of fabricating documents. Then she said, and I quote, "We know our rights, and we will not be bullied by some hermit who does not care about community improvement." I could not help but laugh. A hermit, her words. I informed her that we would be filing a formal lawsuit and that she might want to consult with the HOA's attorney. She hung up on me. What is our next step? We file the lawsuit tomorrow. I am also going to request a preliminary injunction to stop them from operating the storage units while the case is pending. Given our documentation, I am confident the judge will grant it. The lawsuit was filed on June 25th in Jefferson County Circuit Court. I was the plaintiff, and the defendants were the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, Karen Novick individually as HOA president, and Morrison Construction Company. I was seeking $500,000 in damages, removal of the structures at the defendant's expense, and all legal fees. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for July 7th. In the meantime, Karen apparently decided to go on the offensive. On July 1st, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a man named Douglas Pemberton from a firm in Clayton. The letter claimed that I had given verbal permission for the storage units 2 years ago during a community meeting about the subdivision development. It stated that I had indicated no objection to future community improvements near the property line, and that the HOA had relied on this representation. This was complete fiction. I had attended exactly one community meeting about Meadowbrook Heights, and that was before they broke ground on the subdivision. I had made it clear that I wanted my property boundaries respected. I had never given permission for anything to be built on my land. I forwarded the letter to Benjamin, who called me that evening. "This is a desperation move," he said. "They are trying to establish some kind of verbal agreement or implied easement. Do you have any documentation from that community meeting?" "I have the minutes," I said. "They were emailed to all attendees afterward. I saved them. Send them to me." I found the email from 3 years ago and forwarded it to Benjamin. The minutes clearly showed that I had expressed concerns about property boundaries and had requested that the development maintain a buffer zone. There was no mention of me giving permission for any future construction on my property. The preliminary injunction hearing arrived. Benjamin and I sat at the plaintiff's table in Judge Margaret Richardson's courtroom. On the other side were Douglas Pemberton, Karen Novick, and 2 other HOA board members I did not recognize. Judge Richardson was a woman in her mid-50s with a reputation for being extremely thorough and not tolerating nonsense. She had reviewed all the filed documents before the hearing, and I could tell from her expression that she had already formed an opinion. Douglas Pemberton argued first. He claimed that the property boundaries were unclear, that his clients had relied on a professional survey, and that there had been a verbal agreement allowing for the construction. He presented their survey documents and tried to explain how the legal description in their permit could be interpreted to include the land where the storage units were built. Judge Richardson listened without expression. When he finished, she said, "Mr. Pemberton, I have reviewed the independent survey report commissioned by the plaintiff. Are you disputing those findings?" "Your Honor, we believe there may be discrepancies in the survey methods used," Douglas said. The survey was conducted by Midwest Land Surveying, one of the most respected firms in the state, Judge Richardson said. "Do you have any actual evidence of errors in their methodology?" "We would need time to commission our own independent survey, Your Honor." "You have had 2 weeks since receiving the plaintiff's notice. Why did you not do that already?" Douglas had no good answer to that. Benjamin presented our case methodically. He showed the original property survey, the independent verification survey, and then walked through the timeline of construction with photos and videos. He presented the GPS data showing the exact locations where each photo was taken. He showed the newspaper article where Karen was quoted discussing the storage facility as an HOA amenity. He presented the HOA website screenshots showing the rental fees. Then he dropped the hammer. He presented the minutes from the community meeting 3 years ago, which directly contradicted the HOA's claim that I had given verbal permission. Your Honor, the defendants did not accidentally build on the wrong property, Benjamin said. The evidence suggests they either knew they were trespassing or were willfully ignorant of the property boundaries. The plaintiff has suffered damages including the destruction of mature trees, unauthorized use of his land, and the construction of commercial structures without his consent. We are asking for an immediate preliminary injunction stopping all operations of the storage facility pending final resolution of this case. Judge Richardson turned to Karen Novick. Miss Novick, did you personally verify the property boundaries before beginning this construction project? Karen stood up. She had the look of someone who was used to getting her way through sheer force of personality. Your Honor, we hired professionals. We trusted their expertise. We invested significant HOA funds into this community improvement in good faith. Did you personally verify the boundaries? Judge Richardson repeated. I reviewed the survey our contractor provided, Karen said. Did you compare it to the recorded property plat for Mr. Jameson's land? Karen hesitated. I trusted our contractor to do that. So you did not personally verify, Judge Richardson said. It was not a question. Your Honor, we have 20 homeowners who are relying on these storage units, Karen said, her voice rising slightly. They have paid rental fees. They have moved their belongings in. Shutting down this facility would cause significant disruption to our community. Miss Novick, those are consequences of your decision to build on property you did not own, Judge Richardson said. Her tone was sharp. This court will not allow trespassing to continue simply because it would be inconvenient to stop. She looked down at her notes for a moment, then rendered her decision. I am granting the plaintiff's request for a preliminary injunction. Effective immediately, the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association is ordered to cease all operations of the storage facility located on the plaintiff's property. All renters must be notified within 48 hours that they need to remove their belongings. The facility must be completely vacated within 2 weeks. The HOA is prohibited from entering the plaintiff's property or operating the storage units in any capacity pending final resolution of this case. Does everyone understand? Your Honor, this is extremely disruptive to our community, Douglas said. Your community is not my concern, Mr. Pemberton. Property rights are. This hearing is concluded. I walked out of the courthouse feeling vindicated. Benjamin shook my hand on the steps outside. That went as well as we could have hoped, he said. Now comes the harder part. The actual lawsuit will take time, but Judge Richardson's ruling today establishes the key facts. The HOA is going to have a very difficult time defending against the damage claims. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched with satisfaction as the HOA scrambled to deal with the fallout. They sent notices to all 20 renters informing them that the facility was closing due to unforeseen legal issues. Several residents showed up at my door demanding to know why I was ruining a community amenity. I politely declined to discuss the matter and referred them to my attorney. Karen tried a different approach. She showed up at my house on a Saturday morning in late July, alone this time, driving her white Mercedes. I watched her park in my driveway and approach my front door. I considered not answering, but I was curious what she would say. I opened the door before she could knock. Mr. Jameson, we need to talk, she said. Up close, I could see the stress on her face. Her makeup was perfect, her clothes were expensive, but her eyes were tired. I have nothing to say to you, Miss Novick. All communication should go through my attorney. Please, just give me 5 minutes, she said. I need to understand what you want. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside onto the porch. I did not invite her in. What I want is for people to respect my property rights, I said. You built a commercial facility on my land without permission. You cut down my trees. You charged people money to store their belongings on property you do not own. What did you think was going to happen? The survey showed it was HOA common land, Karen said. We made an honest mistake. An honest mistake would have been caught before you poured the first foundation, I said. You did not verify the property boundaries because you did not want to. You saw a piece of wooded land and assumed you could use it. We invested over $200,000, Karen said. Her voice cracked slightly. The HOA does not have unlimited funds. If we lose this lawsuit, we will have to levy a special assessment on every homeowner in Meadowbrook Heights. People will be furious. Some families might have to sell their homes because they cannot afford the assessment. That is not my problem, I said. You should have thought about that before trespassing on my property. What do you want? Karen asked. Money, we can arrange payments, access to the land. We can draft a lease agreement. Just tell me what it will take to resolve this without destroying our community. I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me almost felt sympathy. Almost. Miss Novick, you had 2 years while that facility was being planned and built to do this the right way. You could have approached me. You could have offered to buy an easement or lease the land. You could have verified the property boundaries. Instead, you just took what you wanted and assumed no one would stop you. Now you are facing the consequences. I am not interested in negotiations. You are a cruel man, Karen said quietly. No, I am a man whose property rights were violated, I replied. There is a difference. Now please leave. Any further communication should go through our attorneys. She stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back to her Mercedes. I watched her drive away, then went inside and emailed Benjamin to let him know about the conversation. He called me within an hour. They are going to try to settle, he said. That visit was Karen testing the waters to see if you would be reasonable. When you refused, their attorney will now approach me with a formal settlement offer. The question is, what do you actually want from this case? I had been thinking about that question for months. I want the storage units removed at their expense, I said. I want the land restored as much as possible, including replanting trees. I want compensation for the trees they destroyed, plus compensation for unauthorized use of my land for the past 3 months. And I want a formal, written apology from the HOA acknowledging what they did. What about the construction value of the units themselves? Benjamin asked. What do you mean? The structures on your property belong to you. They become part of your real estate. You could demand that they leave the units in place and pay you for the use of the land, essentially forcing them into a lease situation. Or you could keep the units and tell them they no longer have access. I considered this. The storage units were well built. I had no personal use for them, but they represented a significant asset. How much would it cost them to remove everything? I asked. Probably $50,000 to $75,000 for demolition and land restoration, plus another $20,000 minimum for replacing mature trees, though you can never really replace 80-year-old oaks. And if I kept the units and denied them access, they lose their entire investment. $200,000 plus whatever they spent on planning and permits. You own free and clear storage units worth about $150,000 in construction value. But then, I have storage units on my back 40 that I do not want, I said. True. Though you could rent them out yourself, or eventually sell the property with improvements. I thought about it for a few days. The idea of the HOA losing their entire investment was satisfying, but I also did not really want 20 storage units on my wooded land. What I wanted was for my property to be returned to its original condition, and for the HOA to be held accountable. "Tell them I want the units removed and the land restored," I told Benjamin. "But the price for that privilege is $300,000 plus all my legal fees. They pay me for the damages, the unauthorized use, the trees, everything. They remove the structures at their own additional expense, and Karen Novick resigns as HOA president." "That is a steep price," Benjamin said. "They built a $200,000 facility on land they did not own. They need to understand actions have consequences." Benjamin drafted a settlement proposal outlining my terms. He sent it to Douglas Pemberton on August 5th. The response came back within 3 days. The HOA rejected the proposal, calling it extortionate and unreasonable. They countered with an offer of $75,000, removal of the structures and land restoration. No admission of wrongdoing, no requirement for Karen to resign. "They are playing hardball," Benjamin told me. "They think you will accept a lower number rather than wait for a trial." "Then we go to trial," I said. "I have waited this long. I can wait longer." "Trial is scheduled for October 15th, Benjamin said. "That gives us 2 months to prepare. I am going to depose Karen Novick, the other HOA board members, and the contractor who did the survey work. We are going to find out exactly who knew what and when they knew it." The depositions happened throughout September. Benjamin let me read the transcripts afterward. They were revealing. Karen's deposition showed that she had been aware there were some questions about the property boundaries, but had pushed forward anyway because the HOA had already budgeted for the project. When asked directly if she had verified the legal description on the permit against the recorded property plat, she admitted she had not. The contractor's deposition was even more interesting. The surveyor from Morrison Construction testified that he had raised concerns about the property boundaries to his supervisor, who had told him to follow the legal description provided by the HOA. The surveyor had not done his own independent verification, because that was outside the scope of work he had been hired to do. In other words, the HOA had provided Morrison Construction with an ambiguous or incorrect legal description, and Morrison had built where they were told to build. The contractor was negligent, but the HOA was the source of the error. The HOA's insurance company got involved in September. They sent their own attorney to review the case. 2 weeks before trial, Benjamin got a call from a new lawyer representing the HOA, a woman named Patricia Chen from a large firm in St. Louis. "Mr. Fletcher, I have reviewed this case thoroughly," Patricia said. "My client was badly advised by their previous counsel. We would like to discuss a settlement." This time, the offer was much closer to what I wanted. $250,000 in damages, removal of the structures at HOA expense, professional land restoration including replanting of appropriate native trees, and a formal letter of apology. The only thing missing was Karen's resignation. "She is willing to resign from the HOA board," Patricia said when Benjamin pushed on that point, "but she wants it to be characterized as voluntary, not forced." "That is acceptable," I told Benjamin, "as long as she is gone." The settlement was finalized on October 1st, 2 weeks before trial. The HOA would pay me $250,000, remove the storage units within 90 days, and restore the land to its natural state within 6 months. Karen would resign from the HOA board by the end of October. The HOA would issue a formal letter acknowledging they had built on my property without permission and apologizing for the trespass. The money was wired to my account on October 5th. The demolition began on October 15th, right when our trial would have started. I watched from my back porch as crews from Morrison Construction tore down the storage units they had built just 6 months earlier. It took them 2 weeks to completely remove everything. The concrete foundations were jackhammered and hauled away. The gravel access road was torn up. The land was graded and reseeded with native prairie grass. In November, a landscaping company came out and planted 40 new oak, hickory, and walnut trees throughout the 40-acre section. They were young trees, maybe 8 feet tall, and it would be decades before they reached the size of the ones that had been cut down. But it was a start. Karen's resignation was announced at the HOA board meeting on October 28th. The official statement said she was stepping down to focus on family commitments. I heard through the grapevine that many Meadowbrook Heights residents were furious with her. The HOA had to levy a $50,000 special assessment on all homeowners to cover the costs not covered by insurance. For a community of 80 homes, that worked out to about $625 per household. I received the formal letter of apology in early November. It was signed by the new HOA president, a man named Thomas Whitaker, and all remaining board members. The letter acknowledged that the HOA had constructed storage units on my property without permission, apologized for the trespass and the destruction of trees, and thanked me for working with them to resolve the matter. I framed the letter and hung it in my office. The final land restoration was completed in early December. The landscaping company did a final inspection and pronounced the work complete. Benjamin reviewed everything and confirmed that all terms of the settlement had been met. On December 15th, exactly 9 months after I first saw that construction equipment on my property, I walked my back 40. The land still showed signs of the disruption. The new trees were small and vulnerable looking. The reseeded areas had not fully grown in yet. But the storage units were gone. The access road was gone. My property was mine again. I stood at the old property line, looking back toward the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision. I could see a few houses through the bare winter trees. I wondered what those homeowners thought about the whole situation. Did they understand that their HOA had been completely in the wrong? Did they blame me for not stopping the construction earlier? Did they grasp that I had every right to let them build first and sue later? I did not really care what they thought. I had protected my property rights. I had held the HOA accountable, and I had been paid for the violation of my land. The following spring, I hired a local conservation group to help me develop a management plan for the back 40. We identified areas where invasive species needed to be controlled. We marked the locations of the new trees so I could protect them from deer browse. We discussed eventually establishing some hiking trails, just for my own use. I also installed a new fence along the property line between my land and Meadowbrook Heights. Not a spite fence, just a nice split-rail fence that clearly marked where their property ended and mine began. I wanted there to be absolutely no confusion in the future. I saw Karen one more time in June of the following year. I was at the grocery store in Hillsborough, loading bags into my truck, when I noticed her getting out of her Mercedes a few spaces away. She saw me and hesitated, clearly debating whether to acknowledge me or not. I nodded to her. After a moment she walked over. "Mr. Jameson," she said. "How are you?" "I am well, and you?" "I am fine. I am no longer with the HOA, as you know. I heard. I hope everything worked out for you." She gave a bitter little laugh. "I learned an expensive lesson about due diligence. I hope your property has recovered. It is getting there. These things take time." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, Then Karen said, "For what it is worth, I really did think we were building on HOA land. I was not trying to steal from you." "I believe you," I said. "But good intentions do not excuse negligence. You were responsible for knowing where your property ended and mine began." "I know," she said quietly. "I know that now." She got into her Mercedes and drove away. I finished loading my groceries and drove home. That was almost 2 years ago now. The new trees on my back 40 are thriving. The native prairie grasses have filled in beautifully. You would have to look carefully to see any sign that there were once 20 storage units built where they should never have been. I still take my morning coffee on the back porch most days, looking out over my 100 acres. I still value my privacy and my property rights. And I am still glad I waited, letting the HOA commit fully to their trespass before I lowered the legal hammer. Some people might think I was cruel, letting them build the entire facility before informing them of their mistake. But I see it differently. They had multiple opportunities to do the right thing. They could have verified the property boundaries before starting construction. They could have stopped when their own surveyor raised concerns. They could have approached me at any point during the months of construction. Instead, they assumed they could do whatever they wanted. They assumed that a man living alone on 100 acres would not notice or would not care. They assumed wrong. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA is now run by new leadership. They are much more careful about property boundaries and much more respectful of neighboring landowners. I occasionally see Thomas Whitaker, the new president, at community events in town. He always nods politely. We have never discussed the storage unit situation directly, but I can tell he learned from his predecessor's mistakes. As for me, I am still retired, still enjoying my 100 acres and still very protective of my property rights. My back 40 is healing. The oak trees will grow tall again, though it will take decades. The hickories will provide nuts for the wildlife. The land will recover. And I have $250,000 in the bank, compensation for the temporary disruption to my peaceful enjoyment of my property. I've used some of it to improve my own land management practices, to establish conservation easements on the most ecologically sensitive areas, and to support local land trust organizations. The rest I have invested. Call it the HOA Education Fund. The money I earned from teaching one homeowners association a very expensive lesson about property rights, trespassing, and the importance of doing your homework before building on land you do not own. I consider it money well spent. Not by me, of course. By them. Every time I walk my back 40 and see those new trees growing, I remember the day I first saw that construction equipment parked on my land. I remember making the decision to wait and watch. I remember documenting everything with meticulous care. I remember the satisfaction of walking into Judge Richardson's courtroom with an ironclad case. But mostly, I remember the fundamental principle that guided my actions from the beginning. This is my land. I worked hard to buy it. I paid for professional surveys to mark it. I pay taxes on it every year. And no one, not a homeowners association, not a contractor, not anyone, has the right to use my property without my permission. That principle is worth defending. It was worth the months of patience. It was worth the legal battle. And it was definitely worth the final outcome. My property rights were violated. I held the violators accountable. Justice was served slowly but thoroughly. And my back 40, scarred but healing, stands as testament to the importance of property rights, careful planning, and the strategic value of patience when dealing with those who overstep their boundaries. The storage units are gone. The HOA learned their lesson. My land is mine again. And that, in the end, is exactly how it should be.